is Hannah Close. I'm a writer, photographer, and filmmaker. I also dabble in many other art forms, including collage, deep mapping, and foraged foreshore garments. I work a lot with islands and oceans. However, at the core of my work is a call to connect more deeply with the earth at large, which leads me to this webinar, which kicks off the Wild Imagination Exploring Creative Ecology course I've put together for Advaya, along with the help of 12 brilliant guest teachers. So the course explores how creativity can help us attune to the life around us, and why working imaginatively with the earth is vital during these times of sterility and alienation from the rest of life. So today I'm joined by two stellar creatives, Robert Macfarlane and Lucy Neal. Thank you both for being here. It's such a joy to bring you together. And I will just introduce you officially. So Rob is internationally renowned for his writing on people and place. His books include Underland and the forthcoming Is a River Alive, available from the 1st of May. He has also written operas, plays and films, and has collaborated with artists including Olafur Eliasson and Stanley Dunwood. And with Jackie Morris, he co-created the best-selling books of poetry and art, The Lost Words and The Lost Spells. Lucy Neal is an artist, writer, and co-director of Walking Forest, a 10-year public artwork inspired by forest ecology and the hidden stories of women activists and earth defenders. She was co-founder director of the London International Festival of Theatre and is the author of Playing for Time, Making Art as If the World Mattered, which maps an aesthetics of care responding to an earth in crisis. So two incredibly qualified people for this conversation, I might add, and we're just going to go straight into it. So I'll be asking Rob and Lucy some questions and we'll just see where we end up. And before we get into the details, I think it's important to define our terms. Now, I feel like the conversation ahead is probably going to be pretty averse to the very idea of defining terms, but we're going in at the deep end. What is creativity, Lucy?
Wow. Well, it's fun, that's for sure. It's kind of innate, I think, in our capacity to weave our way between that which is real of the real world and that which is imaginary or dreamt. And we need them both. And I think that in 1,000 million different ways since time began, we've found ways to conjure in our mind's eye, and then whether it's with our hands or anything else, to make something new. I'll leave it there.
I'm glad you got that one first, Lucy. It gave me time to think. Hello, everyone. I will just say hello, and it's amazing to see that run of places and names all around the world. It's the mycelium is running tonight and globally. So I'll add my ecosystem to that list by saying I'm atop the 99 million year old chalk of South Cambridge, and there is plum blossom falling outside, and the song of the angle grinder is lulling the sun to sleep in my little suburb. It's wonderful to be here and to be in conversation with Lucy, whose work, as I was just telling her, I've been teaching in Cambridge this year, and it's been a joy to do so. Creativity, I would define it as making with. It is always making with. The inheritance of the windless solitude of the privatized ego and the vision of that, which really became formalized in Romanticism, inherited as a broader form of subjectivity and installed at the heart of so many of our systems of thinking, ruling, and making, is devastating and wrong. We are always making with. And there's a lovely reminder of the play and the chance involved in creativity in that rather mechanical word invention, which actually comes from the Latin invenire, meaning to discover. And I think there is a lovely happenstance buried deep in that rather mechanized verb. So it is chance and play and making with.
I concur with you both. Thank you. We'll go to the next question unless there's anything else on that one.
There's one quote that I absolutely love. It's Martin Buber, and it's about play. And he says that play is the exaltation of the possible. And so I think that creativity bridges you into that sort of field that is one of endless change, transformation, and possibility. And therefore, to be alive to that.
That's it, isn't it? To be alive. Yeah, totally agree with that. Biophilosopher Andreas Weber, who I believe is on this call somewhere with us, says that reality is a creative wilderness. And the musician Nick Cave, who writes the incredible Red Hand Files, by the way, you have to read that, it's so good. He talks about the imagination being the last true wilderness. So it seems as though both of these wildernesses are undergoing some kind of process of domestication in modernity. What are your thoughts on this? And what do you think the main threats are, Lucy?
Well, I think I dispute the statement actually, because I mean, I came into creative practice through the theatre. In my heart, I'm a theatre maker, which in essence is about story. And it's an innately collaborative practice. And I think what holds me still to any form that is possibly a sort of more expanded concept of theatre is that it tends to be live. Something happens in it. And that for me is the sort of the magic of what happens in that live moment. And I think that what happens in those live moments is often a connection with time that feels slightly different, but also a sort of connection with the universe that feels slightly different. So what I love about that is this kind of coming together of these planes of time, if you like, where it's both, you know, it's a story and it's potentially a sort of imagined story, but because it's being enacted in real time, sometimes the universe just throws something up providential, which is what comes about through this complicity of the story and what's being enacted and where it's being enacted. And, you know, I mean, if you're outside, the chances are that an owl will hoot. Anyway, I think I'm going back to my original point about creativity, which was this sort of endless figure of eight loop, really, between that which we dream and imagine and that which is of the physical world. So I would never want to think that reality was a creative wilderness, because for me, it's the constant grounding of that which is conjured and transformative and imaginary. Tyson Yunkaporta writes absolutely brilliantly about this, you know, and says we have to keep creation in motion. Our creativity is in service to that in many ways, but the way we do that is to keep this loop going between that which is of real in the physical world and that which we bring into it, which can be absolutely our own. But that is how we keep creativity going, by holding these two spheres, you know, as one, really, that which is dreamt, that which is conjured and imagined, and that which is actually, you know, the world, the river, the plant, the bee, the burdock, the badger, the whatever it is that we're engaging with in a life system.
I think I dispute the terms of the question as well in different ways. I always balk at the word wilderness, really. It's had such problematic histories, and we need only to go back to Trump's inauguration address in January, which was absolutely a bingo card of the revival of 19th century settler tropes. We had Manifest Destiny, we had the Westwards Drive and the Frontier Spirit, and we had Untamed Wilderness, which was the phrase that Trump used to, in a single swipe, depopulate the continent before white arrival. So wilderness has often been used to empty, and I would always prefer wildness, I think. And there, perhaps we move towards what the imagination is or can be. It's a place where otherwise can be encountered and can be gathered from and can be taken back into the real and used to change the real. You asked what the enemies were, and I think let's say wild thought. And I think it's important to name them early in this conversation and be clear that they are as active, as avid as perhaps they have ever been, that we live now in an age of violent de-animation. I mean, this has been happening for almost as long as we've been writing things down. Ursula Le Guin has a zingy one-liner about that. The Epic of Gilgamesh is also the first record of ecocide. But right now, Trump is overseeing a campaign of de-animation. Doug Burgum, in his Senate hearings, explicitly named America's public lands as America's balance sheet. everything must be assetized. The Environmental Protection Agency, which was founded in 72 or 70 rather, as a direct really response to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, a brilliant example of the kinds of art making that we're talking about today, is now under the control of Lee Zeldin, who has announced the biggest regulatory rollback in US history, with 31 frameworks concerning clean air, clean water, climate, all going. So the Environmental Protection Agency is the Environmental Devastation Agency. It's become the EDA. So the kind of thinking and the kind of work that we are talking about today can feel desperately fragile in the face of brute power like that. And it is, but it is also the ground, I believe, one of the grounds on which to find firm footing, to organize, to join, and to step forwards against this. So wildness, not wilderness, 1 foot in the wild and 1 in the real, and on we go.
Yeah. So, the poet Kenneth White, who I'm a big fan of, being based in the Hebrides, he's absolutely wonderful. He founded the geopoetics movement, which there is some reading material in the course as well on geopoetics, because in my view, the practice of what I'm calling creative ecology is just a tangential version of geopoetics, but more on that later. Bit of an aside. Kenneth White wrote about expressing the earth in his work. So what does expressing the earth mean to you, especially in light of this reality that we are to the earth?
Expressing the earth. I'll speak with an example then. So recently Cosmo Sheldrake, the musician, multi-instrumentalist and trained as an anthropologist, Juliana Furci, the mycologist, and Cesar Rodriguez Garavito, the human rights and rights of nature lawyer, and I, who are all part of an organization called MOTH, the MOTH Life Project, the More Than Human Life Project, which I'd encourage you all to look up and investigate what we're doing. We made a song in the cloud forests of northern Ecuador, in Los Cedros, the cedar forest, threatened cloud forest. We wrote it and set it almost entirely there, and it was indisputably, to me, written in collaboration with, in cooperation with the forest as a co-artist, a co-author. We weren't expressing the forest, we were creating with the forest. And it seems to me that this shouldn't be a problematic proposition. It seems almost so obvious as to be trivial, as to be self-evident that we make art with the living world, with that which enlivens us. But copyright law doesn't recognize that anywhere in the world. There is no jurisdiction in which a more than human creator has had its moral authorship recognized and then upheld within courts of appeal. So we have filed petition in the Ecuadorian legal system, along working closely with Ecuadorian colleagues on this, in order to try to destabilize that fundamentally anthropocentric block of copyright law within a jurisdiction, the Ecuadorian system, that already recognizes the rights of nature at constitutional level. We've just had our suit rejected last week on the grounds that the forest is not an animate entity, which we obviously rubbed our hands with glee at the madness of, and we will now escalate it again with Ecuadorian colleagues to the next level of the legal system. So I move away slightly from the idea of expressing nature, expressing the living world. It makes it sound a little bit like a coffee. And instead I go back to the idea of thinking with and even radically being thought by, and then finding ways in the world to recognize that fundamentally collaborative process.
Thanks, Rob. Brilliant. I don't know the poet that you refer to, but when Rob was speaking, I remembered an event. It was a performance, a play that we staged in the Timber Festival a couple of summers ago. And this was as part of Walking Forest, which is our 10-year public art project with 3 other artists, Ruth Benthoven, Anne-Marie Culhane and Shelley Castle. But we were engaged in a collaborative work with some research scientists who were dendrochronologists, ecologists and biologists, looking into the memory of trees, which has just been concluding, mostly looking at how trees respond to the stress of increased atmospheric carbon, etc., etc. And I thought, okay, I'll write a play, and it was called Ring of Truth, in which a 200-year-old oak took the government to court in 2030, assuming that the Rights of Nature Act had been passed in English law in 2028. So on the day, we were under a canopy of beech trees in a forest with the public, who were the audience, but they were also the jury. And a lawyer who some of you know, and I know Rob knows very well, Paul Powersland, acted as the counsel for the claimant, the 200-year-old oak, and had written a skeleton argument which created a legal base for this moment. There was a moment during the performance when something opened up as a possibility, which is the 3 expert witnesses in the dock were giving evidence of stress of trees, and one was a insect scientist, one was a biologist, one was an ecologist, and they were giving an account of the 200-year-old oak's lived experience from a scientific point of view. But then there was a point at which they took off their lab coats and they spoke as one by one as oak, as the tree, one as soil, as one as insect. And in many ways, it was the moment at which the piece sort of lifted, I think, for the public, because we can all get our heads around the rights of nature, actually. It's not complicated at all. It just says that a river, a tree, a mountain or whatever has a right. It has a right to flourish and not be harmed. And the moment at which the scientists stepped out of their role and gave voice on behalf of the place we were in, the soil, the tree which we could see, there was a sort of something in the air which shifted something for me, and I think also the public. This was in a purely fictional setting, but at that moment, that's the actual moment that I lived through, where I would say it's perfectly possible to act on behalf, to speak for, and speak as. And I would also add that Charlotte Ducan helped us in the sort of writing part of this particular piece of writing about how do we give voice to the more than human.
Thank you both. No, I'm enjoying that you're poking holes in my questions. It's really important. I hadn't thought about it that way before. I thought that I would talk about expressing the earth. It's like trying to get across the fact that we are the earth, right? There's not this nature and earth over there. It's nature. I mean, the word nature, don't get me started. And I've actually got a question about that later. And we've already spoken about the word wild as well. So we're just mired in semantic rubbish a lot of the time, and trying to wade through that. Both of your responses lead very nicely into my next question, which is, both of you work collaboratively, whether that's with other people or with the earth itself, who are also, the other people are also the earth itself. See, I'm doing it again. What have you learned from this way of working? And why do you think it's important for us to shift away from the idea of the lone genius?
Shall I go?
Yeah, please.
I sort of mentioned earlier about theatre being essentially about story. And when I finished working with the London International Festival of Theatre, the story that was definitely coming into my life at that point was that this was collapse and a crisis, and Earth, nature, and the climate crisis was what was creating the science of that was bringing us to a standstill. I was quite new to sort of coming into all these things, but what I knew was that how we live within planetary boundaries was one aspect of what I then started looking at in terms of that story and how we reconnect to Earth. But I think the evolving practice creatively was also how we are community creatures. How do we create localized culture that is actually grounded in place, has a context, and is rooted in some way? And in that regard, I am grateful to the transition movement, because I just walked out my door and worked setting up. I live in Tooting, South London, which became a real learning curve in terms of collaboration. Because in answer to your question, I would say it's hard. Collaboration is marvelous and wonderful and joyous, and everything that you could never do on your own is achieved. But it requires a lot from us, I think, in terms of our creative practice, because humans are so flipping complicated that however many wonderful, extraordinary ideas we have, as someone said, we're social creatures, but we're not yet community creatures. And how do we conjure with localized, rooted lives and work that are creative? Not always where we live, but to do it where we live is a extraordinarily humbling, a place of great gift if we have collaborative work there. And I'm not even really gesturing here of what in terms of the air and the sea and the sky and the rivers and the natural world that we're collaborating. I'm talking about human beings here actually, but I think we have to get on with that one as well. We have to work with who's in the room.
It's really good to hear you talk about how hard collaboration can be. I think I and others can have a tendency to utopianize it, and then actually, particularly at the tougher faces of it, let's say, you come up against friction and inertia and drag and resistance in ways that are not always generative. And I sometimes think about the collaborations I've known as kind of quantum, I'm making this up as I go along, but something like quantum, Newtonian, and radioactive, let's say. So the quantum ones are the ones in which the inputs bear no proportional relationship to the outputs, and everything is alchemized and magnified in ways that are utterly thrilling to be around, but can also be quite chaotic. The Newtonian ones are the ones where everyone is causal in the ways that they sort of recognize and ought to be, and the billiard balls bounce off one another and really interesting patterns can get made. And then the radioactive ones are where the nature of collaboration is such that it sours into competition and other forms of problem and corruption. Fortunately, I've known relatively few of the last and a few of the first, and plenty of the middle. And then just thinking about collaboration. So Robin Wall Kimmerer, obviously we all know Robin's work here. I think her, the great book is Braiding Sweetgrass, or when I say great, the one that has reached most people. But actually, I always say a wonderful word for her book, Gathering Moss, her book on moss. And she says there, water is held best, not by an individual shoot, but by the collective sponge of an entire colony. And there's something lovely in that. And I think the same is partly true of hope as well. Hope can run easily from us. We're easily punctured, especially by today's spikes. When hope is absorbed by those around you and held, you find it flows back into you. And I keep thinking about images for this kind of collective work. And I stumbled across, in the early part of this year, I stumbled across the word planetesimal on a Wikipedia rabbit hole for some reason, and I became fascinated by it. Planetesimal is literally a tiny planet. It's a minute celestial body which holds the potential under the right gravitational conditions to be drawn towards other planetesimals and then form a new world. And I thought there was something wonderful about thinking about ourselves as each planetesimals, and out there this evening is a good example of that. Here are 277 planetesimals who, under the right gravitational conditions, might move together to form a new world. And new worlds don't need to be planet-sized. They can be small and local as well. So, yes, collaboration and the holding of hope.
I'm really glad you're bringing physics into this, because I feel like that always gets neglected in conversations about the Earth.